The static burst through the operations center like a scream in the church. Hazel Carter's mop handle struck the military radio with a dull thud, sending the device clattering across the polished concrete floor of Hangar 7. The desperate voice crackled through the sudden silence. "Mayday, Mayday! SEAL Team 8, coordinates 3.7 north, 17.4 west, taking heavy fire, ammunition critical. Get the hell out of here!" Captain Blake Harrison's face flushed crimson as he whirled around from the tactical display. His uniform bore the crisp lines of someone who'd never seen actual combat, every ribbon perfectly aligned, every crease sharp enough to draw blood. "You have no authorization to be in this area during operations." Hazel kept her eyes down, water dripping from her industrial mop onto the floor she'd just cleaned. But her peripheral vision caught the coordinates flashing on the screen behind Blake's shoulder. Those numbers were wrong, completely, catastrophically wrong. The actual position would put the team 30 miles deeper into hostile territory than anyone realized. In a valley she knew intimately, a place where no extraction was possible after sunrise. "Sorry, sir, but those coordinates..." Her voice barely rose above a whisper, the words fighting past 3 years of practiced silence. "I said get out!" Blake's hand slammed the table, making the junior officers jump. Behind him, the command staff continued their debate, their words carrying the casual finality of men discussing quarterly reports rather than human lives. Colonel Mason adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, studying casualty projections on his tablet. "The risk-to-reward ratio is unacceptable. We're looking at potentially losing an entire extraction team to save 6 men who are probably already compromised." "Compromised means dead," Lieutenant Jasper added, with the kind of detached professionalism that came from viewing warfare through drone feeds. "No point throwing good money after bad." Hazel's knuckles whitened around the mop handle. Good money after bad. 6 souls reduced to a line item on a budget report. She backed away slowly, each step measured and deliberate, her body language projecting the submission they expected from civilian contractors. But as she passed the Black Hawk sitting silent in the hangar, her free hand brushed against its fuselage. The touch lasted less than a second, fingers tracing a pattern along the rivets that only someone who'd lived in these machines would know. The helicopter's skin was cold, but beneath her fingertips, she could almost feel its heartbeat, dormant but ready. 3 years since she'd felt that particular vibration, that promise of controlled chaos. 3 years since Panama. 3 years of pushing mops and emptying trash bins while the ghosts of her squadron whispered in her dreams. Master Chief Connor noticed the gesture. 28 years in the Navy had taught him to read the subtle language of warriors, and something about this cleaning woman set off every instinct he'd developed. The way she'd positioned herself in the operations center, back to the wall, clear sight lines to every exit. The way her weight shifted when Blake raised his voice, not cowering but coiling. Most of all, the way her eyes had locked onto those coordinates with the intensity of someone who'd seen those numbers written in blood. "Wait!" Connor's gravelly voice cut through the chatter. "Let her speak." Blake spun around, incredulous. "Master Chief, this is a classified briefing. We don't take tactical advice from janitors." "Maybe we should start," Connor replied, his weathered face revealing nothing. "Because right now, we're about to send a rescue team to the wrong grid square." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Hazel stepped forward, water from her mop bucket leaving a trail behind her. She didn't speak. She'd learned that words meant nothing to men like Blake. Instead, she moved to the wall-mounted map, her movements deliberate and economical. With one finger, still wet from the mop, she traced a line across the topographical display. "That valley floods at 0600 hours, she said quietly. "Every day, like clockwork. The actual coordinates your team transmitted would put them here." Her finger moved 15 kilometers east, in the Sharkey Depression. Surrounded by hostile positions here, here, and here. Each point she marked corresponded to a known enemy stronghold, information that should have been classified well above a janitor's pay grade. Lieutenant Jasper pushed himself off the wall, where he'd been lounging, his 6'3" frame towering over Hazel's 5'6". "How the hell would you know about flooding patterns in a classified operational theater?" She met his gaze for exactly 2 seconds before looking away, long enough to register the challenge, not long enough to accept it. "Weather Channel," she mumbled. Someone snorted. Derek Chen, the air operations specialist, pulled up the satellite imagery on his screen. "She's actually right about the flooding, but that's public information. The enemy positions, though..." He squinted at Hazel with newfound suspicion. That's need-to-know intelligence. Lucky guess, Hazel said, already backing toward the door. But Blake stepped into her path, his chest puffed out with the authority of his rank. Nobody's that lucky. Security, detain this woman. 2 Air Force security personnel moved forward, hands reaching for the zip cuffs on their belts. Hazel's body language shifted so subtly that most missed it, her center of gravity lowering, her stance widening just enough to enable rapid movement. But she didn't run, she didn't fight. She simply stood there, mop in hand, looking every inch the defeated civilian worker these men expected her to be. If you're watching this story unfold, you already feel that burning frustration. The system failing those who serve. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will challenge everything you believe about hidden heroes. Share this with someone who understands that real warriors don't always wear uniforms. They sometimes push mop buckets. The radio crackled again, weaker this time. Base, this is Reaper 8-1. We're down to our last mags. Enemy closing from 3 sides. If anyone's listening, tell our families we fought to the end. The voice belonged to Commander Arthur Chen. Connor knew it instantly. They had served together in Fallujah, pulled each other out of more tight spots than either could count. Connor's jaw clenched as he watched Blake and his staff continue their bureaucratic dance while good men prepared to die. Sir, Technical Sergeant Ashley Pham spoke up from the communications station, her voice cutting through the tension. I'm picking up something odd in that transmission. There's a secondary signal embedded in the carrier wave. Probably interference, Jasper dismissed. But Ashley was already isolating the frequency. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, years of signals intelligence training kicking in. No, sir, it's deliberate. It's an authentication code. Ghost Protocol. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ghost Protocol was a myth, a legend whispered in the darkest corners of special operations. A failsafe used by deep cover assets who'd been declared killed in action, but continued operating in the shadows. Assets who officially didn't exist. Hazel had gone completely still. Not the stillness of fear, but the absolute motionlessness of a predator deciding whether to remain hidden or strike. Her eyes tracked to the Black Hawk, calculating distances, angles, probabilities. 3 years of hiding versus 6 lives hanging in the balance. 3 years of penance versus the oath she'd sworn. Blake hadn't noticed the shift in atmosphere. Ghost Protocol is a fairy tale. Sergeant, stop wasting time with... The lights in the hangar flickered. Emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in red. On every screen in the operations center, a single message appeared. Authentication recognized. Ghost 7 queried, awaiting response. Connor's intake of breath was audible. Holy mother of... What's Ghost 7? Blake demanded. But Connor wasn't looking at him. He was staring at Hazel, who had set down her mop with the careful precision of someone laying down a weapon. Not what, Connor said quietly. Who? The Black Hawk's auxiliary power unit suddenly whined to life. Impossible. The aircraft was locked down, its systems encrypted with military-grade security that would take hours to bypass. But the navigation lights blinked on, the rotor brake released with a pneumatic hiss, and the turbines began their pre-flight sequence. Every person in the hangar turned to stare at the helicopter, then at Hazel, who stood perfectly still in the center of the chaos she'd somehow triggered, from 30 feet away, without touching a single control. Biometric proximity activation, Dr. Grace Winters, the base psychologist, whispered from her position near the door. She'd been observing the briefing as part of a stress assessment program, but now her clinical detachment had evaporated. The aircraft recognizes her. It's responding to her presence. Advanced tactical communication systems like the encrypted satellite phones, now standard in special operations, could have prevented this crisis. These military-grade devices penetrate dead zones, transmit through interference, and maintain crystal-clear connections even in electromagnetic warfare environments. Modern battlefield technology saves lives by ensuring no team gets left behind in communications darkness. Blake's hand moved to his sidearm. Whoever you are, step away from that aircraft. Hazel didn't move, couldn't move. The Black Hawk was calling to her, its system singing the song she'd tried so hard to forget. Every fiber of muscle memory screamed at her to answer that call, to slip into the pilot seat where she belonged, to become again what she'd once been. But that woman had died in Panama, died along with her entire squadron, Died because she'd made a choice that saved 100 lives but cost her everything. Captain, Master Chief Connor stepped between Blake and Hazel, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned his rank in blood rather than classrooms. Lower your weapon. She's a security threat. She's trying to save your operation. Connor turned to Hazel, his eyes searching her face. The flooding pattern you mentioned. You've flown that valley before, haven't you? Hazel's nod was barely perceptible. At night? Another nod. During the storm season? This time she spoke. 47 times. The specificity of the number sent another chill through the room. Nobody flew the Sharky Valley 47 times, unless they were either insane or assigned to missions so classified that they officially never happened. Lieutenant Jasper, his earlier bravado diminishing, pulled up the personnel database on his tablet. There's no record of any Hazel Carter with flight status. She's been a civilian contractor here for 3 years. Background check shows... He stopped, frowning. That's weird. Her records only go back 3 years. Before that, it's like she didn't exist. Because Hazel Carter didn't, Connor said. He'd moved closer to her, close enough to see the thin white scar along her jawline, the kind left by shrapnel from an aircraft canopy exploding, close enough to notice the way she held her left shoulder, compensating for an old injury, close enough to see the ghosts in her eyes. But someone else did. Someone who flew missions we're not supposed to talk about. Someone who died in Panama when Operation Blackwater went sideways. Hazel's composure cracked, just for an instant. Don't. 200 civilians evacuated before the cartel's bomb detonated, Connor continued, his voice soft but relentless. A pilot who stayed behind to ensure every transport got out, even though her own extraction window had closed. Ghost Squadron's only female pilot who flew her damaged bird into the jungle rather than risk it crashing into a populated area. Stop! The word came out as barely a whisper. Lieutenant Commander H. Carter, Ghost 7, the pilot who got her entire squadron killed. The words exploded from Hazel, 3 years of guilt and self-loathing given voice. The hangar fell silent except for the whine of the Blackhawk's turbines. 6 pilots died because I made a judgment call, because I chose civilians over my own people. So, yes, Master Chief, I died in Panama. Let me stay dead. But the radio wouldn't let her. Arthur Chen's voice, weaker now, filled the silence. 2 minutes until sunrise. If anyone's planning a miracle, now would be good. Sunrise. In the Sharky Valley, sunrise meant death. The enemy positions would have clear fields of fire across the entire depression. No cover, no concealment, no hope. Hazel looked at the Blackhawk, then at the countdown timer on the tactical display showing 4 minutes until the sun breached the horizon at the target location. An impossible window. She'd need to be airborne in 30 seconds, flying at the machine's absolute limit, threading between enemy positions in darkness, and executing a combat extraction under fire with no door gunner, no co-pilot, no backup. Impossible, unless you'd done it 47 times before. The authentication system, Dr. Winters said suddenly, it's not just recognizing her biometrics, it's requesting command authorization. Ghost 7's command codes are still active in the system. Blake laughed, harsh and disbelieving. That's impossible. Dead operators get purged from the system immediately. Unless they're not dead, Ashley said from her station. She'd pulled up something on her screen, her face pale in the red emergency lighting. Unless someone very high up wanted them to stay operational, but off the grid. Sir, I'm showing an authorization flag here that's so classified I shouldn't even be able to see it. National Command Authority level. The implications hung in the air. Someone at the highest levels of government had kept Ghost 7's authorization active. Someone had been waiting for her to surface again. Hazel moved toward the Blackhawk with sudden purpose. Blake stepped into her path, his hand still on his weapon. You're not going anywhere. She looked up at him, and for the first time since she'd entered the hangar, Captain Blake Harrison saw who he was really dealing with. The submission was gone, replaced by something that made him take an involuntary step backward. It wasn't aggression or threat. It was the absolute certainty of someone who had already died once and found it liberating. Captain, she said quietly, in about 3 minutes, 6 American servicemen are going to die because you're more concerned with protocol than lives. You can shoot me, arrest me, or get out of my way. But choose quickly because their blood will be on your hands, not mine. You can't fly that aircraft alone, Derek Chen protested. A combat extraction requires... Hazel had already moved past Blake, who seemed frozen by indecision. She grabbed a flight helmet from the equipment rack, not randomly, but selecting one specific helmet that had been gathering dust in the back. When she turned it over, the name tape was still there. Ghost 7. Holy! Iris Wang, the radar technician, breathed. She's real. The ghost pilots are real. The mythology of Ghost Squadron had circulated through the military aviation circles for years. Pilots who officially didn't exist, flying aircraft that were never there, executing missions that never happened. They were the ones called when failure meant catastrophe, when the ordinary special operations weren't special enough. And according to legend, they'd all died in Panama when something went catastrophically wrong. But legends apparently could push mops in Nevada hangars. Hazel pulled on the helmet with practiced efficiency, the muscle memory flooding back like water through a broken dam. The weight of it, the smell of the liner, the way the comm cable clicked into place, it all felt like coming home after a long, cold exile. "You'll need ground support," Connor said, moving to the communication station. "Ashley, patch me through to Reaper 8-1 on encrypted channel 7. Blake found his voice. "Master Chief, I'm ordering you to court-martial me later, sir." Connor's tone suggested exactly what Blake could do with his orders. "Ashley, tell Chen to pop smoke in 90 seconds. White smoke if the LZ is hot, red if it's clear." "There won't be red smoke," Hazel said, climbing into the Blackhawk's cockpit. Her hands moved across the controls in a complex pattern, and the aircraft's combat systems came online with a symphony of electronic tones. "There's never red smoke in the Sharkey Valley." She looked different in the pilot's seat. The hunched, apologetic posture was gone, replaced by the bearing of someone who belonged there. The cockpit instruments illuminated her face in green and amber, and for a moment the years fell away. She wasn't a janitor who had stumbled into a crisis. She was Lieutenant Commander Carter, and she had work to do. "Still watching? Good. You're witnessing something extraordinary building. Like this video now, because Hazel's about to show these officers something they'll never forget. Comment below if you've ever been underestimated. The revelation coming will vindicate everyone who's been dismissed." "Ghost 7, you can't do this alone," Connor said into his headset. "The enemy has RPG teams on both ridges." "I'm not doing it alone," Hazel replied, her voice different now, clipped, professional, carrying the tone of command. "You're going to talk me through their positions. Iris is going to feed me real-time satellite data, and Ashley's going to jam their communications at exactly the right moment." "I am," Ashley squeaked. "Frequency 147.3, narrowband disruption, 10-second pulse, on my mark." Hazel's hands continued their dance across the controls, programming waypoints, calculating fuel consumption, setting up the defensive countermeasures. "You trained at Goodfellow, didn't you? I can tell by your keyboard positioning. You're better than you think you are." The Blackhawk's rotors began to turn, slowly at first, then building to their operational rhythm. The sound filled the hangar, drowning out Blake's continued protests. But something else was happening. Other personnel were arriving, drawn by the commotion or the emergency alerts. They stood in the doorways, watching the impossible scene unfold. Among them was Chief Warrant Officer Abel, the senior maintenance supervisor who'd been with the base for 15 years. His eyes went wide when he saw who was in the cockpit. "That's impossible," he muttered. "She's dead. I read the after-action report myself." "What report?" Willow Park, one of the flight medics, asked. Abel shook his head. "Classified. But if that's who I think it is..." He raised his voice. "Ghost 7, your bird's running 5 pounds light on the port side. Compensate with a 2-degree trim adjustment." Hazel's thumb rose from the collective in acknowledgement. She'd already noticed the imbalance and made the adjustment, but Abel's recognition meant something. It meant she wasn't alone in remembering. The countdown timer showed 2 minutes to sunrise. Hazel increased the throttle, and the Blackhawk lifted off the hangar floor with a grace that defied its utilitarian design. But instead of immediately departing, she held a hover at 20 feet, the aircraft rotating slowly to face the assembled personnel. Through the cockpit glass, they could see her clearly now. The helmet framed a face that had hidden behind indifference and submission for 3 years, but the eyes belonged to someone who'd seen the worst humanity could offer and still chose to fly toward it. All units, Connor's voice boomed through the hangar's PA system. "We have a Guardian Angel departure, 0347. Ghost 7 is airborne." Guardian Angel, the call sign for combat search and rescue, the pilots who went into hell to pull others out. But Connor had added something else, something that made the old-timers in the crowd straighten their spines. Colonel Mason, who had been silent through the entire exchange, finally spoke. "Did you just say Ghost 7? His usual bureaucratic detachment had vanished. "The Panama Ghost 7? Connor nodded. Mason's tablet clattered to the floor. "Clear the airspace, clear everything, give her whatever she needs." "Sir?" Blake protested. "You can't seriously believe—" "Captain, shut up and watch." Mason's voice carried an edge of something between awe and fear. 3 years ago, I was the intelligence officer for Operation Blackwater. I watched the satellite feed when Ghost 7 flew her damaged aircraft through a cartel's air defense network that had already shot down 2 helicopters. She saved 200 civilians while leaking fuel and flying on 1 engine. The cartels put a $5 million bounty on her head. The Pentagon declared her killed in action to protect her identity. Then why is she here? Why is she mopping floors? Mason looked at the Black Hawk as it pivoted toward the hangar exit. Penance, Captain. Survivor's guilt. Or maybe she was exactly where she needed to be, waiting for a moment like this. The Black Hawk surged forward, accelerating from hover to maximum speed in seconds. The force of the rotor wash sent papers flying throughout the operations center, but nobody moved to collect them. Every eye was fixed on the monitors showing the aircraft's progress. "Time to sunrise, 90 seconds, Ashley announced, her fingers poised over the jamming controls. "Ghost 7, be advised, satellite shows enemy movement toward the SEAL team's position," Iris reported, her radar training translating into tactical awareness. "Estimate 30 to 40 hostiles converging from the north." "Copy." Hazel's voice was steady, almost meditative. The Black Hawk was now traveling at 160 knots, just below its maximum speed. She was saving the extra margin for when she'd need it. "Connor, I need you to relay something to Reaper 8-1. "Go ahead. Tell him Ghost 7 says remember Coronado. He'll know what it means." Connor relayed the message, and Arthur Chen's response was immediate, his voice cracking with emotion. "I copy, Ghost 7. Coronado remembered. We'll be ready." Military life insurance and disability coverage for special operations personnel requires specialized underwriting. These high-risk policies provide up to $10 million in death benefits, immediate deployment activation, and coverage for classified missions. Financial protection for those who operate in shadows ensures their families remain secure regardless of mission outcomes. Nobody in the operations center knew what Coronado meant, but the effect on Chen was obvious. His voice strengthened, the despair replaced by determination. Whatever the reference, it had given him hope. 60 seconds to sunrise, Ashley called. "Ghost 7, you're still 8 miles out." 8 miles in 60 seconds. It was mathematically impossible at the Black Hawk's maximum speed, but Hazel wasn't flying by mathematics anymore. She was flying by instinct, by feel, by the accumulated knowledge of 47 previous flights through this exact valley. "Watch this," Abel murmured to those around him. On the monitor, the Black Hawk suddenly dropped altitude, disappearing from radar. "We lost her!" Iris shouted. "No," Connor said, a slight smile creasing his weathered face. "She's terrain masking, flying so low that the Earth itself hides her from enemy radar." The satellite feed showed the truth. The Black Hawk was racing through the valley at an altitude of fewer than 20 feet, following the dried riverbed that would flood in minutes. The aircraft's skids were literally feet from the ground, traveling at speeds that would mean instant death if Hazel's concentration wavered for even a second. "Sunrise in 30 seconds, Ashley announced. "Ghost 7, enemy forces are—" "I see them." Hazel's voice remained calm. Through the night vision display, she could see the hostile fighters moving through the rocky terrain, converging on a small defensive position marked by infrared strobes, the SEAL team's last stand. "White smoke! White smoke!" Chen's voice crackled through the radio. "LZ is hot. Repeat, LZ is hot." The smoke grenade's pale plume rose into the pre-dawn darkness, a beacon for rescue and a target for the enemy. Muzzle flashes erupted around it as the hostiles opened fire on the SEAL's position. "Ashley, on my mark," Hazel said. 3, 2, 1, mark! The jamming pulse hit the enemy's communication net precisely as the Black Hawk crested the final ridge. For 10 seconds, the hostile forces couldn't coordinate, couldn't call for reinforcements, couldn't warn each other about the hurricane of rotor blades and fury descending upon them. Hazel brought the Black Hawk in fast and low, using the aircraft itself as a weapon. The rotor wash sent a sandstorm through the enemy positions, blinding them, disorienting them. She pivoted the aircraft, placing its armored belly between the hostiles and the SEAL team, using the helicopter as a shield. "Load and go," she shouted over the intercom, though she had no crew chief to relay the order, but Chen understood. Through the video feed, they could see the SEALs rushing toward the Black Hawk, carrying their wounded, laying down suppressing fire as they moved. An RPG streaked past the cockpit, missing by feet. Then another. Hazel held position, steady as a rock, even as rounds spanged off the aircraft's armor. The fuel gauge was dropping. She'd been hit, probably in the auxiliary tank, but she held position. "5 on board," Chen's voice. "One more coming." The last SEAL was dragging a wounded teammate, struggling through the sand. Enemy fighters were closing from 3 sides. In the operations center, everyone held their breath. Sunrise was breaking, golden light spilling across the mountain peaks. "He's not going to make it," Blake said quietly. Hazel proved him wrong. She lifted the Black Hawk 5 feet, tilted it forward, and used the rotor wash to literally blow the approaching enemies backward. The maneuver was insane, requiring precise control while making the aircraft vulnerable to ground fire, but it gave the last SEAL the seconds he needed. "All aboard! Go! Go! Go!" Hazel pulled power, and the Black Hawk leaped skyward, but she didn't flee. Instead, she pivoted the aircraft, facing the enemy positions, and reached for a control panel that shouldn't have been active on an unarmed helicopter. "What's she doing?" Jasper asked. Abel's grin was savage. Ghost Squadron birds were never exactly standard configuration. The Black Hawk's emergency flare dispensers fired, but instead of defensive flares, they launched white phosphorus markers directly into the enemy positions. Not weapons, technically, marking rounds for an airstrike that would never come, but the psychological effect was immediate. The hostile fighters scattered, thinking they'd been targeted for annihilation. It bought her the time she needed. Hazel pushed the Black Hawk to its limit, racing the rising sun out of the valley. The fuel gauge touched empty, the engine temperature redlined, and half the warning lights on her panel were screaming. But she kept flying. "The tension's unbearable, isn't it? We're seconds from the truth exploding. Subscribe and ring the bell. You won't want to miss what's about to shatter every assumption in that hangar. The ghost is about to reveal herself." In the operations center, the silence was deafening. Everyone stared at the monitors, watching the damaged Black Hawk limp home on fumes and determination. The satellite feed showed enemy vehicles giving chase, but they were too far behind, too late. Ghost 7 had done the impossible. 2 minutes out, Connor announced, though everyone could see it on the screens. Blake stood rigid, his worldview shattered. Everything he believed about protocol, authority, and chain of command had been proven wrong by a janitor with a mop bucket. Beside him, Colonel Mason was on a secure phone, speaking rapidly to someone at the Pentagon. "Yes, sir. Ghost 7, confirmed." "No, sir, she's been here the whole time." "Yes, sir, I understand." He ended the call and turned to Blake. "Captain, you're relieved of duty, pending investigation." "What? I was following protocol." "You were about to let 6 Americans die because you couldn't see past your own assumptions." Mason's voice was ice. "Ghost 7 may have been mopping floors, but she's got more operational experience than everyone in this room combined. And you dismissed her because she was holding a mop." The Black Hawk appeared over the horizon, flying low and rough, trailing smoke from its damaged engine. Emergency vehicles were already rolling toward the landing pad, but Hazel brought it in smooth as silk, touching down with a gentleness that seemed impossible given the aircraft's condition. The rotors hadn't even stopped turning when the side door burst open. Arthur Chen emerged first, helping a wounded teammate. He looked around the assembled crowd, his eyes searching until they found Hazel climbing out of the cockpit. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then Chen, Commander Chen with his trident insignia and combat decorations, rendered a perfect salute to the woman in the janitor's uniform. The gesture rippled through the crowd. One by one, every military member present came to attention and saluted. Abi, Connor, Ashley, even Mason. They were saluting not the uniform, but the warrior who'd worn it, the pilot who'd chosen obscurity over acclaim, the ghost who'd returned when needed most. Hazel stood there, helmet in hand, overwhelmed by the recognition she'd spent 3 years avoiding. But as she looked at the 6 SEALs she'd just saved, something shifted in her expression. The guilt was still there, might always be there, but maybe, just maybe, saving these lives had balanced the scales a fraction. Ghost 7, Connor said formally. Naval Special Warfare Command wants to speak with you. She nodded, then looked down at her janitor's uniform, now stained with hydraulic fluid and aviation fuel. I should probably change first. No, Chen said, his voice rough with emotion. Wear it just like that. Let them see what a real hero looks like. But before anyone could respond, before the moment could crystallize into something ceremonial, Blake made his last mistake. His hand had been creeping toward his sidearm, his face twisted with humiliation and rage. In his mind, this woman had destroyed his career, his authority, his entire identity as an officer. He drew his weapon halfway before Hazel moved. 3 years of mopping floors hadn't dulled her reflexes. She stepped inside his reach, her left hand controlling his wrist, while her right drove an elbow into his solar plexus. Blake doubled over, gasping, the pistol clattering across the concrete. The entire takedown took less than 2 seconds. First rule of close quarters combat, she said quietly, stepping back. Never telegraph your intent. Security moved in to restrain Blake, but the damage to his dignity was complete. He'd been disarmed by a janitor, a woman a foot shorter and 70 pounds lighter. But worse than the physical defeat was the look in everyone's eyes. Not anger or shock, but disappointment. He'd revealed himself as the worst kind of officer, one who valued power over purpose. It was then, in that moment of absolute revelation, that the truth became undeniable. Hazel's uniform shirt had been torn in the brief struggle, revealing what 3 years of careful concealment had hidden. The tattoo, black ink against pale skin, wrapped around her upper arm like a secret she'd carried alone. A skeletal figure in flight gear, wings spread wide, carrying souls across a river of stars. Above it, the words Ghost Squadron. Below, a designation that made everyone step back. 7. KIA Panama 21. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wounded SEALs stopped moving. Everyone stared at the impossible proof etched in Hazel's skin. Killed in action. The tattoo that Ghost Squadron members received only when one of their own fell. Except this one was on the person who had supposedly died. You gave yourself a KIA tattoo? Iris whispered. I earned it, Hazel replied, pulling her torn shirt closed. The woman who flew into Panama didn't come back. Someone else did. Someone who thought she could disappear, could pay for her choices by being nobody. She looked at the SEALs she'd just saved. I was wrong. Master Chief Connor was the first to break the silence, his voice carrying the weight of understanding that only came from losing brothers in arms. Panama, Operation Blackwater, August 12, 2021, 1700 hours local time. The specificity made Hazel flinch. That date, that time, was seared into her memory like a brand. Connor continued, addressing the assembled crowd but keeping his eyes on her. 6 Ghost Squadron pilots went in to evacuate civilians from a cartel stronghold before the government's bombing run. Intel said the site was lightly defended. Intel was wrong. He paused, letting the words sink in. The cartels had surface-to-air missiles, military-grade hardware that shouldn't have been there. Ghost 2 and Ghost 4 were hit in the first 30 seconds. Stop, Hazel's voice cracked, but Connor pressed on, gentle but relentless. Ghost 7 took command. She could have retreated, saved the remaining aircraft. Protocol demanded it. Instead, she ordered the others to continue the evacuation while she drew fire. One helicopter against an entire cartel army. The morning sun streaming through the hangar doors caught the tears tracking down Hazel's face. Around them, the crowd had grown. Word had spread through the base like wildfire. Ghost 7 was alive. Personnel who'd only heard whispers of the legendary squadron were witnessing history. She saved 200 civilians, Connor continued. Farmers, teachers, children who had been caught between the cartels and government forces. But the cost, he shook his head. Ghosts 3, 5, 6, and 8 were shot down during the extraction. Ghost 7 managed to get the civilians to safety, then flew her damaged bird into the jungle rather than risk it crashing in populated areas. The official report listed her as killed in action when the aircraft exploded on impact. Except it didn't explode, Colonel Mason added, studying something on his tablet. The Pentagon just declassified portions of the after-action report. Satellite imagery showed you ejected at the last second, didn't it? Spent 3 weeks evading cartel kill teams through the jungle before a Navy SEAL team extracted you. Hazel's hands were shaking now. The memories she'd buried under 3 years of routine maintenance and floor cleaning were clawing their way to the surface. The screams over the radio as her squadron died. The weight of command decisions that traded lives for lives. The endless second-guessing in the dark jungle nights, wondering if she could have saved them all with different choices. "Why didn't you come back?" Willow asked softly. "Why let everyone think you were dead?" "Because I should have been," Hazel replied, her voice hollow. 6 pilots died following my orders. 6 families destroyed because I chose strangers over my own people. The cartels had a bounty on my head, yes, but that wasn't why I stayed dead. She looked at the assembled faces, searching for judgment, but finding only attention. I stayed dead because Ghost 7, the pilot who got her squadron killed, deserved to be dead. "That's survivor's guilt talking," Dr. Grace interjected, her professional composure reasserting itself. "You made the best decision with the information you had. Those pilots knew the risks." "They trusted me!" The words exploded from Hazel. "They followed me into hell because they trusted my judgment, and I led them to their deaths." "You led them to save 200 innocent lives," Chen corrected, stepping forward despite his injuries. "You think those pilots would have chosen differently? You think any of them would have turned their backs on civilians to save themselves?" He pulled something from his tactical vest, a challenge coin, battered and worn. "Coronado, 2018. Remember? You pulled my entire team out of an ambush, flying through conditions that should have been impossible. You saved 12 SEALs that day, and today you saved 6 more. That's 18 operators who are alive because of you, 18 families that didn't get folded flags. Does that count for nothing?" The weight of his words hung in the air. Around them, others began speaking up. A crew chief who had flown with Ghost 7 in Iraq, a communications specialist who'd coordinated missions in Afghanistan. Each had a story, a moment when Ghost 7 had made the impossible possible, when she'd risked everything to bring people home. "I monitored your flights in Syria," Ashley admitted. "We called you the Night Witch. You flew missions other pilots wouldn't touch, always at night, always alone after Panama. The intelligence community knew someone was running solo operations, but we could never confirm who. Specialized legal advocacy for military whistleblowers and classified personnel protects those who serve in secret capacities. These firms handle security clearance disputes, unauthorized disclosure accusations, and identity protection for deep cover operators. When ghost units surface, they need attorneys who understand both military law and intelligence protocols. That's why you were here, Connor realized. You weren't hiding, you were waiting. Stationed at a base where special operations teams deploy from, where you could monitor radio traffic, where you could be ready if... He trailed off, the implications staggering. "If someone needed help," Hazel finished, "if I could save even one life to balance the scales." "And the Pentagon knew," Mason added, still reading from his tablet. "This is signed by the Secretary of Defense himself. Orders to maintain your cover, to keep Ghost 7's operational status active, but classified beyond black. You weren't abandoned, Lieutenant Commander. You were being protected while you healed." "Lieutenant Commander?" Blake sputtered from where security held him. "She's an officer?" "She's more than that," a new voice said from the hangar entrance. Everyone turned to see a figure silhouetted against the morning sun. As he stepped forward, the stars on his uniform became visible. Lieutenant General Marcus Stone, commander of Air Force Special Operations Command. The entire hangar snapped to attention, except for Hazel, who seemed frozen in place. Stone walked directly to her, his bearing formal, but his eyes warm. "At ease, everyone." He stopped in front of Hazel. "Hello, 7. Sir." The word came out as barely a whisper. 3 years, Stone said. 3 years I've been waiting for you to be ready. The psychologist said forcing you back would break you completely. So, we waited, watched, kept your commission active, your clearances current, your aircraft maintained." "My aircraft?" Hazel looked confused. Stone smiled slightly. "You didn't think we'd let just any Black Hawk respond to your biometrics, did you? Serial number November 77 Ghost. Your bird, 7. We've kept her ready, waiting for you to come home." The revelation sent another ripple through the crowd. The Black Hawk she'd just flown, the one that had responded to her presence like a loyal dog to its master, was the same aircraft she'd flown in combat. They'd kept it here, maintained it, prepared it, knowing that someday she might need it again. "I can't," Hazel said, shaking her head. "I can't be that person again." "You never stopped being that person," Stone replied. You just tried to bury her under a mop and bucket. But when those SEALs needed help, when the system was about to fail them, who stood up? Not Captain Blake with all his authority, not the assembled command staff with their protocols and risk assessments, the janitor, because under the uniform, under the assumed identity, you're still the pilot who flies toward the fire when everyone else flies away. He reached into his pockets and pulled out a small wooden box. By order of the President of the United States, and with the full endorsement of the Joint Chiefs, I'm authorized to present you with this. He opened the box. Inside lay the distinguished flying cross with Valor device, the silver wings gleaming in the hangar lights. For extraordinary heroism while participating in aerial flight, Stone read from memory. Lieutenant Commander Hazel Carter, call sign Ghost 7, repeatedly risked her life to save others, embodying the highest traditions of naval service. Her actions in Panama, though classified, saved 200 civilian lives at great personal cost. Her actions today saved 6 special operators who had been abandoned by their chain of command. Sir, Furthermore, Stone continued, his voice rising so everyone could hear, effective immediately, Ghost Squadron is being reconstituted. The Night Witches will fly again. And if she'll accept, we want Ghost 7 to lead them. The hangar erupted. Applause, cheers, and whistles echoed off the metal walls. But Hazel stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of 3 years of self-imposed exile. She looked at the metal, at the general, at the faces around her, some crying, some grinning, all looking at her with something she'd forgotten existed, respect without reservation. I got my squadron killed, she said quietly, though only Stone could hear her over the celebration. No, he replied equally quietly. You made an impossible choice in an impossible situation. Every Ghost pilot knows the risks. They died as warriors, saving innocents. Honor their sacrifice by living, not by hiding. Before Hazel could respond, her torn shirt shifted again, revealing more of the tattoo. But now, in the morning light, they could all see what they'd missed before. Below the KIA designation were 6 names, etched in smaller script. The Ghost pilots who died in Panama. She'd been carrying them with her, literally carved into her skin. You've been in purgatory long enough, Stone said. Your squadron is waiting for you. Not the ones who died, you can't bring them back, but the ones who are still flying, still fighting, still needing the kind of leader who chooses lives over protocol. Chen stepped forward, speaking directly to Hazel. You saved us today. Let us save you now. Come back to the world, Ghost 7. We need you. The moment hung crystalline, waiting for her answer. But before she could speak, every phone in the operations center began buzzing simultaneously. Alert tones filled the air. Ashley rushed to her station, fingers flying over the keyboard. Sir, we've got a situation. Multiple emergency beacons just activated. A diplomatic convoy's been hit 60 miles north. They're requesting immediate evacuation, but, she paused, reading the tactical data. They're surrounded. Estimate 50-plus hostiles. No conventional aircraft can get through that airspace. Incredible, right? But Hazel's story doesn't end here. Hit subscribe for the next chapter. What happens to ghost pilots who come back from the dead? Share this story of hidden service. True heroes choose obscurity over glory. Every eye turned to Hazel. General Stone said nothing, but his message was clear. This was her choice. Return to the shadows or answer the call. Hazel looked at the Black Hawk, its rotors still cooling from their impossible flight. She thought of the 6 names etched on her arm, the 6 pilots who'd followed her into death. Then she thought of the diplomats surrounded, terrified, waiting for salvation that might never come. How many birds do we have operational? She asked, her voice carrying a tone of command that made everyone straighten. 3 Black Hawks, 2 little birds, Connor replied immediately, falling into the role of operations coordinator without being asked. Crew, I can fly, volunteered Lieutenant Holly Parker from the back of the crowd. She'd been silent until now, but her flight wings marked her as qualified. I've got 800 hours in Black Hawks. 400 in Little Birds, added Sergeant Ryan Mills. I'm in. Others stepped forward. Not the senior officers, not the decorated veterans, but the young pilots who'd grown up hearing stories of Ghost Squadron, who'd dreamed of flying with that level of purpose. Hazel turned to General Stone. Sir, I'll need operational command. You have it. I'll need to break about 30 regulations. Break them. I'll need Blake's tactical team reassigned to my authority." Blake started to protest, but Stone silenced him with a look. "Done." Hazel nodded, then did something unexpected. She walked over to Blake, who was still being held by security. She looked him in the eye, studying the man who'd dismissed her, threatened her, nearly let good men die because she didn't fit his idea of authority. "Captain Blake," she said formally, "you're not a bad officer. You're just fighting the wrong war. This isn't about rank or protocol or chain of command. It's about service. You can either be part of the solution or continue being the problem. Choose." Blake's face went through a series of expressions: anger, humiliation, confusion, and finally, something like understanding. "What do you need me to do?" "Coordinate ground support for the extraction. You're good at logistics, at systems, at making sure everything runs smoothly. Do that. Be our anchor while we fly." It was an olive branch, a chance for redemption. Blake looked at the metal in Stone's hand, at the tattoo on Hazel's arm, at the faces of the people he had nearly failed. "Yes, ma'am." The transformation was beginning. Hazel moved to the tactical display, her bearing changing with each step. The janitor was gone. In her place stood Ghost 7, battered but not broken, scarred but not stopped. "Connor, I need real-time intel on that convoy. Ashley, establish communications with the diplomatic security team. Iris, plot me 3 different approach vectors through the mountains. Holly, Ryan, pre-flight those birds. We launch in 10 minutes. 10 minutes? Holly gasped. That's impossible. Hazel turned, and Holly saw something in her eyes that made the word impossible seem suddenly negotiable. In Ghost Squadron, we redefine impossible every day. You want to fly with ghosts? Then learn to be one. Move. The hangar exploded into controlled chaos. Personnel ran to their stations, equipment was rapidly checked and loaded, flight plans materialized on screens. But through it all, Hazel stood still at the center, a fixed point around which the hurricane of preparations swirled. General Stone approached her. "The Pentagon wants to know your intentions after this mission. 1 mission at a time, sir. The President himself is watching. This could change everything. How we approach special operations, how we select personnel, how we define service." Hazel looked at the challenge coin Chen had given her, running her thumb over its worn surface. "Service doesn't seek recognition, sir. That's what I learned mopping floors. The best work often happens in shadows, done by people whose names will never be known. But your name is known now. Then maybe it's time to remind people what that name means." She turned to face the assembled team, raising her voice. "Ghost Squadron flies in 5 minutes. We bring everyone home or no one. That's the promise. That's the code." A chorus of acknowledgments rang out. Hazel started toward the Black Hawk, but Connor caught her arm. 7, he said quietly, using her call sign with deliberate respect. "The diplomatic convoy. There's something you should know. The ambassador's daughter is with them. 15 years old. A child in danger. The same age as some of the civilians in Panama." Hazel's jaw tightened. "Then we'd better hurry." She climbed into the Black Hawk, her Black Hawk, and began the startup sequence. But this time, she wasn't alone. Holly took the co-pilot's seat, nervous but determined. Through the windscreen, Hazel could see the other aircraft preparing, pilots running through rapid checklists, door gunners loading ammunition. "Ghost 7 to Ghost Flight," she said over the radio, falling back into the rhythm of command, like putting on a perfectly fitted glove. "Systems check. Ghost 9 ready," Holly responded, having instantly accepted her new call sign. "Ghost 10 ready," Ryan called from the Little Bird. "Ghost 11 standing by," another pilot added. 4 aircraft, 4 pilots, against 50 hostiles in fortified positions. The odds were impossible. But then again, Ghost Squadron had always specialized in impossible. "General," Hazel called over the command frequency, "request permission to incorporate non-standard tactics." "Clarify non-standard. I'm going to do something that would make flight instructors weep and insurance actuaries faint." Stone's chuckle came through the radio. "Permission granted. Show them why ghosts don't follow physics." The aircraft lifted off in perfect formation, 4 shadows against the morning sky. As they cleared the base perimeter, Hazel felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years: purpose without guilt. The 6 names on her arm would always be there, always hurt. But maybe, just maybe, she could honor them by saving others. "Ghost Flight, form on me," she commanded. "We're going downtown." The formation tightened. 4 aircraft moving as one. Below, traffic on the highway stopped as people looked up at the unusual sight. Military helicopters weren't rare in Nevada, but these were flying with a precision and purpose that suggested something significant was happening. In the operations center, now designated as Ghost Control, the entire base seemed to have gathered. Word had spread like wildfire. Ghost 7 was flying again. Veterans who had thought that the squadron was a myth stood next to young airmen who'd grown up on the legends. All watched the monitors showing the aircraft's progress toward the crisis. Ghost 7, this is Ambassador Richards on diplomatic security frequency, a voice crackled through the radio. We're pinned down. They've got RPGs, heavy machine guns. We've lost 2 security vehicles. My daughter, please. Ambassador, Ghost 7 copies. Keep your heads down. ETA 8 minutes. 8 minutes? The nearest base is 30 minutes away. How? Sir, we're ghosts. Distance is negotiable. She pushed the Black Hawk harder, the engine temperature climbing but holding. Through the headset, she could hear the other pilots breathing hard, fighting to keep up with her aggressive flight profile. They were flying nap of the Earth, using terrain features to mask their approach, but at speeds that turned every hill into a potential death trap. Contact, Ryan called. Vehicle convoy, 2 o'clock. Looks like 6 vehicles surrounded. Hostiles have the high ground. Hazel studied the tactical display. It was a perfect ambush position. The convoy had been forced into a box canyon with only one exit, now blocked by hostile vehicles. The surrounding ridges gave the attackers perfect fields of fire. Any conventional extraction would be a bloodbath. But Ghost Squadron didn't do conventional. Ghost Flight, execute Valkyrie profile. Valkyrie? Holly asked. That's not in any manual. Because I invented it in Afghanistan. Watch and learn. Hazel pulled the Black Hawk into a climb so steep it should have stalled. But instead of fighting the physics, she used them, converting forward momentum into altitude, then pivoting at the apex to dive toward the canyon. The maneuver was insane. It presented the aircraft's belly to enemy fire for crucial seconds, but it also did something else. Flares, 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 Hazel called. All 4 aircraft released flares simultaneously, but not defensively. The flares fell into the canyon like artificial stars, creating a ceiling of blinding light and heat that destroyed the enemy's night vision and targeting systems. In the confusion, the Ghost Flight descended through their own flare screen, appearing suddenly in the canyon like apparitions. The psychological effect was devastating. The hostiles, who'd been confidently controlling the engagement, suddenly faced 4 aircraft that had literally materialized from nowhere. Door gunners opened up with suppressing fire, not to kill, but to create chaos, to break the enemy's coordination. Ambassador, move your people to the vehicles now, Hazel commanded. Ghost 9, cover the North Ridge. 10 and 11, suppress the exit route. I'm going for pickup. The Black Hawk descended into the canyon, rotor blades mere feet from the rock walls. It was beyond dangerous. It was suicidal. But Hazel flew with the confidence of someone who'd already died once and found it liberating. She could feel every air current, anticipate every updraft, dance with physics like a familiar partner. Loading civilians, someone shouted over the radio. 30 seconds. 30 seconds in a hot landing zone was an eternity. Rounds sparked off the Black Hawk's armor. An RPG whooshed past, so close Hazel could feel its heat through the windscreen. But she held position, steady as a rock, while civilians scrambled aboard. Ghost 7, hostile reinforcements approaching from the east, Connor reported from base. Estimate 20 vehicles, 3 minutes out. 3 minutes. They needed to be gone in 1. All souls on board, the ambassador shouted. Go, go, go. Hazel pulled power, but instead of climbing out the way she'd come, she did something that made even Holly gasp. She flew deeper into the canyon, toward what looked like a dead end. 7, that's a wall, Holly shouted. No, Hazel replied calmly. That's a waterfall, or it was before the drought. The Black Hawk reached the canyon's end, where a sheer cliff rose 500 feet. But Hazel had seen something the others missed. A ledge, barely wide enough for the aircraft, created by centuries of falling water. She pivoted the Black Hawk 90 degrees, flying sideways along the cliff face, using the ledge to mask their signature from enemy radar. The other aircraft followed, trusting her, even though the maneuver defied everything they'd been taught. They emerged from the canyon's far side, behind the enemy positions, turning hunters into hunted. Ghost Control, Ghost 7, package secured, all souls accounted for. RTB. The operations center erupted in cheers. On the monitors, they could see the enemy vehicles arriving at an empty canyon, their perfect ambush ruined by pilots who refused to follow the rules. During the flight back, the ambassador's daughter, a teenager named Emma, made her way to the cockpit. Through the trauma and fear in her eyes, there was something else. Awe. "Are you really her?" she asked. "Ghost 7, the pilot from the stories?" Hazel glanced back at the girl. "I'm just someone who was in the right place at the right time. My mom used to tell me about you," Emma continued. "She was one of the civilians you saved in Panama, Maria Santos. She was pregnant with me." The words hit Hazel like a physical blow. Holly took the controls as Hazel turned to fully face the girl. Maria Santos. She remembered the name, remembered the terrified woman she'd carried to the helicopter herself when labor had started during the evacuation. "You're Maria's daughter?" Emma nodded, pulling out a worn photo. It showed a younger Hazel in full flight gear standing next to a pregnant woman beside a helicopter. "Panama, 3 years ago, minutes before everything went wrong. She named me Emma Hazel Santos," the girl said. "After you. She said you gave me life twice, once by saving her, and again by giving her hope that there were still heroes in the world." The cockpit fell silent, except for the rhythm of the rotors. Hazel stared at the photo, at the woman she'd been before the guilt crushed her. That pilot had believed in absolutes. Save everyone. Protect everyone. Never leave anyone behind. The woman she'd become understood that sometimes you saved who you could and carried the rest as scars. Is your mother okay?" Hazel asked. "She teaches now. Elementary school in San Diego. She tells your story to her students every year on the anniversary, August 12th. She calls it Heroes Day. Heroes Day. For the day 6 pilots died following her orders. The irony was sharp enough to cut. They landed at Fallon to a hero's welcome. The entire base had turned out. General Stone stood at the front, saluting as the aircraft touched down. Behind him, someone had unfurled a banner, "Ghost Squadron flies again." As the civilians disembarked, Ambassador Richards approached Hazel, tears streaming down his weathered face. "You saved my daughter. How can I ever—" "You can't," Hazel said simply, "and you don't need to. This is what we do." But Richards wasn't done. He pulled out a satellite phone, dialing a number from memory. "Sir? Yes, Mr. President, I'm safe. Ghost 7 and her squadron extracted us." "Yes, sir, Ghost 7. She's alive." "Yes, sir, I'll put her on." He held out the phone. Hazel stared at it like it might bite. The president, the commander-in-chief, wanted to speak to her. 3 years of hiding, of being nobody, and now the most powerful person in the country was on the line. She took the phone. "Sir, Lieutenant Commander Carter." The voice was exactly as it sounded on television, but warmer, more personal. "General Stone has briefed me on your situation. 3 years is a long time to carry that weight alone. It was my choice, sir." "And now? What's your choice now?" Hazel looked around at the scene, Connor organizing the debrief, Holly and Ryan comparing notes on the insane flying they had just done, Blake, surprisingly, efficiently coordinating ground support and medical teams. The SEALs she'd saved that morning, Emma Santos, alive because of a choice made 3 years ago. "I choose to serve, sir, however you need me." "Good, because we have a situation. But this one's different. This one requires someone who understands that sometimes the best operations happen in shadows, that the greatest victories are the ones nobody knows about. Sir, there's a phone in your quarters, a secure line that's been dormant for 3 years. When you're ready, it's going to ring. The person on the other end will have a proposition for you. Ghost Squadron isn't just being reconstituted, Commander. It's being reimagined, and we want you to lead it." The call ended. Hazel handed the phone back to Richards, her mind spinning. Her quarters. She hadn't had quarters in 3 years. She'd had a studio apartment in town, a place to sleep between shifts of mopping floors. 7, General Stone approached. "Your quarters are ready. Same building, same room. We never reassigned them. You kept my room for 3 years. We kept everything. Your uniforms, your flight gear, your personal effects, even—" He paused, seeming embarrassed. "Even the coffee mug you left on your desk still has the ring stain from your last cup before Panama." The revelation was staggering. While she'd been punishing herself with anonymity, the military had been waiting, watching, maintaining her life in stasis for her return. "Why?" she asked. "Because warriors like you don't come along often. And when they do, you don't let them disappear. You wait. You hope. You keep the light on. He handed her a keycard. Building 7, Room 7. Seemed appropriate. Hazel took the key, its weight feeling heavier than the helicopter she'd just flown. Returning to those quarters meant accepting that Ghost 7 wasn't dead, had never really been dead, just wounded and healing in the shadows. As she walked toward the housing complex, others fell in beside her. Connor, offering silent support. Holly and Ryan, the new ghosts she'd just christened in fire. Even Blake, humbled and searching for his own redemption. They formed an honor guard of sorts, protecting her from the crowd of well-wishers and curious onlookers. Building 7 stood exactly as she remembered it. The same faded paint, the same squeaky third step, the same view of the flight line. Her keycard worked on the first try, and the door opened to reveal a room frozen in time. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. The flight planning materials spread across the desk, marked with routes through Panama. The photos on the wall, her squadron, all 7 of them, grinning after a successful mission in Iraq. The dress uniform hanging in the open closet, waiting for a return that had taken 3 years. And on the desk, as promised, the coffee mug, Navy Standard issue, chipped on the handle, ring-stained from 1,000 pre-flight briefings. She picked it up, remembering the last morning before Panama. She'd been reviewing weather patterns, calculating fuel requirements, not knowing she was planning the mission that would destroy everything. I had them clean the room every week, Connor said from the doorway. Dust it, air it out, keep it ready. You knew I was here, all this time? Suspected. The way you moved, the way you watched the aircraft, and, he smiled slightly, you fold your uniform shirts the same way. Saw you doing laundry once at the laundromat in town. Ghost Squadron had a specific way of folding, 6 inches by 8 inches, collar facing left. Nobody else does it that way. Such a small thing to give her away, but Connor had kept the secret, maintained the fiction, allowed her the space to heal or hide as she needed. The secure phone sat on the nightstand, black and silent. Waiting. Hazel stared at it, knowing that answering it would mean stepping fully back into the world she'd fled. No more janitor's anonymity. No more simple life of mops and floors and honest labor that didn't cost lives. Take your time, Connor said, starting to leave, but Hazel stopped him. Connor, when I call back the families, the ones who lost people in Panama, what do I say? He turned back, his expression thoughtful. You tell them the truth, that their loved ones died as heroes, saving innocent lives, that their sacrifice mattered, and that you've been honoring their memory the only way you knew how, by continuing to serve, even from the shadows. After he left, Hazel sat on the bed, still made with military precision after 3 years. She looked at the photos on the wall, at the 6 faces that haunted her dreams, Ghost 2 through 8. Their call signs, not their names, because in Ghost Squadron, names were for tombstones and call signs were for legends. The phone rang. She let it ring 3 times, each tone a countdown to decision. On the 4th ring, she answered. Ghost 7. Hello, 7. The voice was female, older, carrying an authority that didn't need to announce itself. I'm Director Sarah Mitchell, National Clandestine Service. We need to talk about Moscow. Moscow. The word hung between them like a challenge. I'm listening, Hazel said. In 48 hours, something is happening in Moscow that could shift the global balance. We have an asset there who needs extraction, but this isn't a military operation. It can't be. This needs to be a ghost story. Someone who doesn't exist, flying aircraft that were never there, executing a mission that never happened. Why me? Because you've already proven you can be nobody. For 3 years, you've been invisible, in plain sight. We need that. We need someone who can disappear into Moscow, extract our asset, and vanish without leaving a trace that connects to the United States. And if I'm caught, then you're a rogue pilot, traumatized by Panama, acting alone. We'll disavow any knowledge of your actions. The same old game. Plausible deniability. Heroes in the shadows bearing risks their country couldn't officially take. But something was different this time. This wasn't about redemption or penance. This was about capability, about being the right person with the right skills at the right moment. I'll need a team, Hazel said. You'll have one. Ghost Squadron is being reformed under your command. 6 pilots, all volunteers, all willing to not exist for their country. The aircraft are already positioned at strategic points. The mission parameters are being uploaded to your secure tablet now. Hazel picked up the tablet from the desk. its screen coming alive with classified markings and operation details. As she read, her expression hardened. The asset in Moscow wasn't just any intelligence operative. It was someone who had been feeding information about a potential nuclear terrorism plot. If they didn't get this person out, thousands could die. "When do I leave?" she asked. "Tonight. But first, there's someone who wants to see you. Hangar 7 in 1 hour." The line went dead. Hazel set down the phone and looked again at the photos on the wall. 6 ghosts staring back at her, waiting to know if their sacrifice had meaning, if the survivor would honor their memory by living or dying in the shadows. She stood, walked to the closet, and pulled out her flight suit. It still fit perfectly, the patches and wings exactly where they should be. The name tape read Carter, but below it was the more important designation, Ghost 7. As she dressed, she noticed something new on the desk. A small box she hadn't seen before. Inside was a challenge coin, but not like any she'd seen. One side showed a ghostly figure with wings, carrying souls across a dark river. The other side had a simple phrase, "The dead don't fly, but ghosts do." She pocketed the coin and headed back to Hangar 7. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. As she walked, she noticed others falling in step with her. Holly and Ryan, now in flight suits with fresh ghost patches. Other pilots she didn't recognize, all wearing the same designation, her squadron, her new squadron. Hangar 7 was packed. It seemed like the entire base had assembled, but at the center, standing beside the Black Hawk she'd flown that morning, were 6 people in civilian clothes. 6 families. Her breath caught. The families of Ghost Squadron, the parents, spouses, and children of the pilots who had died in Panama. An older woman stepped forward. Ghost 2's mother, Hazel, recognized her from the memorial service she'd watched from a distance, hidden in the crowd. "Commander Carter," the woman said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "We've been waiting 3 years to say this." Hazel braced herself for the anger, the blame, the accusations she'd hurled at herself every day since Panama. "Thank you," the woman said instead. "Thank you for trying to save them. Thank you for completing their mission, and thank you for carrying them with you." She gestured to Hazel's arm, where the edge of the tattoo was visible. "We know about the tattoo. We know you've been honoring them, but it's time to let them rest. They wouldn't want you hiding. They'd want you flying." One by one, the other families approached. Each had something to say, something to give, a photo, a patch, a personal item from their lost pilot. Not reproaches but blessings, not anger but understanding. They were releasing her from the guilt, giving her permission to live. The last was a young boy, maybe 10 years old, Ghost 6's son. "My dad told me something before his last mission," the boy said, his young voice clear in the silent hangar. "He said ghosts aren't people who died. They're people who have unfinished business. He said if anything happened to him, his business was making sure other kids got to keep their parents. You finished his business today, didn't you? When you saved those SEALs? They have kids too, right?" Hazel knelt to the boy's level, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, they do." "Then my dad can rest now, and you can fly." The hangar erupted in applause, but Hazel barely heard it. She was holding the boy, feeling 3 years of frozen grief finally begin to thaw. The families surrounded her, a group embrace that somehow included the 6 ghosts who weren't there but were always present. When she finally stood, General Stone was there with a document. "Your orders, Commander. Ghost Squadron is officially reactivated under your command. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to be what you've always been. The impossible made real, the last hope when hope is gone, the ghost in the machine that saves lives from the shadows." Hazel took the orders, but her eyes were on her squadron. 7 pilots now, including herself. 7 ghosts ready to fly into whatever darkness needed them. "Ghost Squadron," she addressed them, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned the right to lead through loss and redemption. "We fly in 1 hour, mission briefing in 30 minutes. We have a job to do." As the crowd dispersed, Connor approached one last time. "7, there's one more thing." He handed her an envelope, old and worn. "This has been in the base safe for 3 years. Instructions were to give it to you when you were ready." Inside was a single photograph. Panama, minutes before the mission launched. All 7 Ghost Squadron pilots standing beside their aircraft. Someone had written on the back in fading ink, "Ghosts never die. They just wait for their time to fly again." Below that, 6 signatures. Her squadron had signed it before that last mission, as if they knew something might happen, as if they wanted her to have this reminder that they chose to fly, chose to serve, chose to follow her into the darkness. Hazel looked at the Black Hawk, its rotors catching the last light of day. In an hour, she'd be airborne again. In 48 hours, she'd be in Moscow, executing a mission that couldn't exist for an asset who needed to disappear. And somewhere, 6 ghosts would be flying with her, finally at peace because their 7th had found her way home. She walked to the aircraft and placed her hand on its fuselage, feeling the mechanical heartbeat within. "Time to fly," she whispered. The secure phone in her pocket buzzed. She pulled it out, seeing a message that made her smile grimly. Package location confirmed, Moscow, 48 hours, Ghost protocol activated. Hazel. Ghost 7 Carter was back, not from the dead, because she'd never really died, just from the shadows where heroes sometimes had to hide until the world needed them again. And as the sun set over Nevada, painting the sky the color of blood and redemption, Ghost Squadron prepared to fly into legend once more. But this time, she wouldn't fly alone. This time, she had a squadron, a purpose, and the knowledge that sometimes the greatest service happened in silence, performed by people whose names would never be known, but whose actions would save lives in the darkness. The janitor was gone. The ghost had risen, and somewhere in Moscow, someone was about to discover that when America needed the impossible, it sent its ghosts. As she conducted the pre-flight check, her movements sure and practiced, Hazel noticed something new painted on the Black Hawk's nose. A small ghost figure, barely visible unless you knew where to look. And below it, fresh script. "Second chances fly at night." Connor's work, probably. Or maybe the crew chiefs who'd maintained this bird for 3 years, waiting. It didn't matter who'd done it. What mattered was the message. This wasn't about the past anymore. This was about the future, about the missions yet to fly, the lives yet to save, the impossible yet to achieve. The other pilots were conducting their own preparations, but she could feel them watching her, taking their cues from her confidence. They were all volunteers, all people who'd chosen to step into the shadows, to become ghosts for their country. They deserved a leader who had earned that sacrifice. "Ghost Squadron," she called over the intercom. "Mission brief in 5, full operational security. What we're about to discuss doesn't exist." "Roger 7, came the chorus of replies. As she headed to the briefing room, Hazel felt the weight of the past 3 years lifting with each step. The guilt would always be there, the 6 names forever etched on her skin and soul, but it no longer crushed her. Instead, it drove her, reminded her that every life saved balanced the scales a little more. The briefing room was secured, electronically swept, and isolated from any surveillance. The 7 pilots sat around the table, their faces serious but eager. These weren't the broken remnants of a failed squadron. These were volunteers who had chosen this life, chosen to be the invisible guardians. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hazel began, pulling up the classified mission parameters on the screen, "in 48 hours, we're going to do something impossible. We're going to fly into Moscow, extract an asset from under the nose of Russian intelligence, and disappear without leaving a trace. No support, no backup, no acknowledgement if we're caught." "Just another Tuesday for ghosts," Holly said with a grin. "Exactly." Hazel smiled back, feeling something she hadn't felt in 3 years. The camaraderie of warriors who understood the cost and chose to pay it anyway. "We're ghosts. We do the impossible, and we bring everyone home." As she laid out the mission parameters, the complexity of what they were attempting became clear. This wasn't just the extraction. This was a magic trick on a global scale, making a person vanish from one of the most surveilled cities on Earth without anyone knowing America was involved. "Questions?" she asked when the briefing was complete. "Just one," Ryan said. "After Moscow, what's next?" Hazel looked at the eager faces around the table. These weren't the ghosts of Panama. Those heroes were gone, their sacrifice honored and remembered. These were new ghosts, ready to write their own legend. "After Moscow?" She pulled out the challenge coin Director Mitchell had somehow slipped into her pocket, its surface catching the light. "After Moscow, we disappear again. We go back to being nobody, waiting for the next impossible mission, because that's what ghosts do. We serve in silence, strike from shadows, and save lives that no one will ever know were in danger." She stood, and the others followed suit. "Ghost Squadron," she said formally, "we fly at midnight. Between now and then, rest, prepare, and remember, the dead don't fly, but ghosts do, and tonight we rise. The salutes were crisp, perfect, and filled with purpose. As they filed out to make their final preparations, Hazel remained behind, looking at the mission parameters one more time. Moscow in 48 hours. An extraction that couldn't happen. An asset who needed to not exist. Once she would have seen only the danger, the risk, the potential for loss. Now she saw the opportunity, the chance to prove that Ghost Squadron's resurrection wasn't just about her redemption. It was about creating something new from the ashes of the old. A squadron that didn't just complete impossible missions, but did so with the wisdom earned from loss and the strength found in shadows. Her phone buzzed one final time. Emma Santos had sent a photo from the base gate as her family departed. It showed the teenager standing beside the Ghost Squadron banner, smiling and holding up a sign. Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they push mops. Hazel smiled, saved the photo, and headed back to the flight line. In 6 hours, she'd be over the Atlantic. In 48 hours, she'd be in Moscow. And somewhere between here and there, 6 ghosts would finally find their peace, as their 7th led a new generation into the darkness. The last thing she did before climbing into the Black Hawk was touch the names tattooed on her arm. A promise and a farewell. The dead would rest, the living would fly. And Ghost 7 would ensure that the sacrifice of Panama led to the salvation of countless others. "Ghost Squadron," she called over the radio as the rotors began to turn. Time to disappear. 7 aircraft lifted into the night sky, their lights extinguishing as they climbed, becoming shadows against stars. Below, the base watched them vanish, knowing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Not the death of heroes, but their transformation. Not an ending, but a beginning. And as the ghost flight disappeared into the darkness, heading toward a mission that would never officially exist, Hazel Carter finally understood the truth. She hadn't survived Panama by accident. She'd survived because sometimes the world needed ghosts more than it needed heroes. And Ghost 7, the janitor who had hidden in plain sight for 3 years, was exactly the ghost the world needed now. The secure phone in her flight suit pocket remained silent, but she knew it would ring again, and again. And each time it did, Ghost Squadron would answer, would fly, would do the impossible. Because that's what ghosts did. They served without recognition, saved without a claim, and disappeared without a trace, except for the lives they saved. Those would remember, even if they never knew who to thank. And somewhere in Moscow, an asset who didn't know it yet was about to be saved by a ghost story. A story of redemption, of service, of the woman who chose to mop floors for 3 years while waiting for the world to need her again. The Ghost 7 story. A legend reborn in Hangar 7. A myth made real by sacrifice and service. And it was only the beginning. The flight across the Atlantic was conducted in complete radio silence. 7 aircraft moving in perfect formation, invisible to radar, unknown to civilian air traffic control. They had refueled twice from airborne tankers whose pilots had been told only that they were supporting a training exercise. Training exercises didn't usually happen at 2 in the morning over the Norwegian Sea, but nobody questioned orders that came from that high up the command chain. Hazel monitored her instruments while Holly dozed in the co-pilot seat, catching rest while she could. The younger pilot had proven herself capable during the diplomat extraction, but Moscow would be different. Moscow would require them to be perfect. Ghost 7, Ghost 11, came a whisper through the encrypted channel. Lieutenant Jack Winters, one of the new squadron members she'd met only hours ago, former Air Force Special Operations, recruited specifically for Ghost Squadron's resurrection. "I've got something on thermal. Looks like we're being shadowed." Hazel checked her own sensors. There, barely visible at the edge of detection range, was a heat signature matching their speed and altitude. Russian early warning aircraft, probably. They'd been expecting this. "All ghosts, execute shadow dance," she commanded. The formation split apart in a choreographed scatter, each aircraft taking a different vector, forcing the tracking aircraft to choose which one to follow. It chose wrong, following Ghost 10's false heat signature, while the real aircraft went dark and changed course. An old Ghost Squadron trick: make them see what you want them to see. 30 minutes later, they regrouped over Finland, still undetected, still unofficial. The new ghosts were good, Hazel realized. Very good. Director Mitchell had chosen well. 7, this is 12, another new voice. Captain Luna Rodriguez, former Delta Force pilot who'd supposedly died in a training accident 2 years ago. Another ghost hiding in plain sight. I've got the asset's beacon. Signal's weak but steady. Looks like they're still in the predetermined location. Copy 12. All ghosts, final approach, briefing. She ran through it one more time, even though they'd memorized every detail. The asset, codename Phoenix, was a deep cover operative who'd been feeding intelligence about a potential nuclear smuggling operation. Their cover had been blown, and Russian intelligence was closing in. The extraction window was 12 minutes. After that, Moscow's entire defense grid would lock down. Remember, Hazel added, we don't exist. If anything goes wrong, you scatter and make your own way to the secondary extraction point. No heroics. Ghosts don't die for glory. They die for purpose, the squadron responded in unison, completing the motto she'd just invented. The approach to Moscow required them to fly below radar coverage, following the Volga River at an altitude that put them below the tree line. It was beyond dangerous. It was nearly suicidal. But the new ghosts handled it with the same calm precision she remembered from the old squadron. Different faces, same spirit. They landed in a forest clearing 17 miles from Moscow's center, coordinates that had been scouted months ago by satellites, but never visited by human agents. The Blackhawks powered down to minimal signatures, while the Little Birds would provide overhead coverage. Ghosts 7 and 9, proceeding to extraction point, Hazel announced, checking her sidearm. She rarely carried weapons as a pilot, but this mission might require more than just flying. All others, maintain perimeter security. She and Holly moved through the forest with practiced stealth, their night vision turning darkness into green-tinted clarity. 3 years of mopping floors hadn't dulled Hazel's combat training. If anything, the repetitive physical work had kept her in better shape than desk duty would have. The extraction point was a maintenance shed behind an abandoned factory. Classic spy thriller stuff, except this was real, and the stakes were nuclear terrorism. They found Phoenix exactly where the beacon indicated, a middle-aged woman with a unforgettable face that made for perfect intelligence work. Ghost 7? The woman asked in accented English. Time to go home, Hazel replied, giving the predetermined response. But Phoenix shook her head. There's a problem. I'm not alone. From the shadows emerged a child, maybe 7 years old, clutching a worn teddy bear. The asset's daughter, Hazel realized with a sinking feeling. This wasn't in the mission parameters. She wasn't supposed to be here, Phoenix explained quickly. My ex-husband dropped her off unexpectedly. I couldn't leave her. But if we take her, they'll know it was an extraction, not a defection. It'll cause an international incident. Holly looked at Hazel, waiting for the decision. By the book, they should abort. Taking the child changed everything. The weight calculations, the speed requirements, the political ramifications. But Hazel looked at the little girl's terrified eyes and saw every child she'd saved in Panama, every family she'd kept whole. We take them both, she decided. Holly, notify the others. We're going to need a distraction. 7, that's an order, Ghost 9. Holly nodded and relayed the information. The response from the squadron was immediate and unanimous. They'd follow 7's lead. Regulations be damned. The journey back to the aircraft should have taken 20 minutes. It took 10, with Hazel carrying the child while Phoenix and Holly provided security. But as they approached the clearing, Ghost 12's voice crackled through the comm. 7, we've got company. Russian special forces, 2 clicks out and closing. Someone tipped them off. A mole. There was a mole somewhere in the intelligence chain. But that was a problem for later. Right now, they needed to leave. All ghosts, emergency dust-off in 60 seconds, Hazel commanded, sprinting toward her Blackhawk. She literally threw the child to Holly, who caught her and secured her in the cabin while Hazel dove into the pilot's seat. The engines roared to life, but the Russian forces were already at the clearing's edge. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness. Rounds sparked off the aircraft's armor. This was going to be close. Ghosts 10 and 11, suppress those positions, Hazel ordered. The little birds swooped in like angry hornets, their door gunners laying down covering fire. Not to kill, that would make this an act of war, but to force the Russians to keep their heads down. All aircraft, execute Houdini exit. Houdini exit was pure Hazel innovation. All aircraft launching simultaneously in different directions, creating so much chaos that tracking any single bird became impossible. Smoke grenades, flares, and chaff filled the air, turning the clearing into a pyrotechnic nightmare. Through the chaos, 7 aircraft scattered to the winds. The Russians would report the contact, but with no casualties and no clear identification, it would be written off as smugglers or black market dealers. Just another weird incident in the wilderness outside Moscow. Hazel flew her Black Hawk at treetop level, the child crying in the cabin, while Phoenix held her close. Holly was working the defensive systems, launching countermeasures every time a radar tried to lock on. Behind them, Moscow was waking up to the intrusion, but it was too late. The ghosts were already fading. All ghosts, report status, Hazel called as they crossed into Finnish airspace. 6 confirmations came back. All aircraft intact, all pilots safe. The mission was technically complete, but Hazel knew the real challenges were just beginning. They'd added an unauthorized passenger, potentially compromised operational security, and definitely violated about 30 international laws. 7, Director Mitchell's voice suddenly filled her headset. I understand there were complications. Director, I made a judgment call. You saved a child, Mitchell interrupted. The same call you made in Panama. The same call that makes you the right person to lead Ghost Squadron. The politicians can sort out the ramifications. You did what ghosts do, the right thing, even when it's the hard thing. The flight back to Nevada took 14 hours with multiple refueling stops. During a maintenance break in Scotland, conducted at a remote military facility whose personnel had been temporarily relocated, Hazel found herself alone with Phoenix and her daughter Katya. Why did you really take us both? Phoenix asked. You could have left her, safer for everyone. Hazel thought about the families in Panama, about Emma Santos, about the choice between protocol and people. Because ghosts don't just complete missions, we complete them right. Your daughter deserves a life, not a footnote in an intelligence report. Phoenix studied her for a long moment. You're not what I expected. The stories about Ghost 7 make you sound like some kind of warrior goddess. But you're just human. That's the point, Hazel replied. Ghosts are human. We make human choices. Sometimes those choices cost us everything. Sometimes they save everything. But we make them, and we live with them. Katya had stopped crying, was now staring at Hazel with the intense curiosity of children. She said something in Russian. She wants to know if you're an angel, Phoenix translated. Hazel knelt down to the child's level. No, little one. I'm just someone who flies helicopters, but sometimes that's enough. They landed at Fallon as the sun was setting, exactly 72 hours after they'd left. General Stone was waiting, along with Director Mitchell and several people in suits who screamed State Department. Commander Carter, one of the suits began, you violated operational parameters. She saved a nuclear physicist who was about to give us the location of 3 stolen warheads, Mitchell interrupted. And she did it without creating an international incident. I'd say she exceeded parameters. The suit looked like he wanted to argue, but Stone stepped forward. Ghost Squadron completed its first mission with 0 casualties, 0 international fallout, and 2 lives saved instead of 1. If that's not a success, I don't know what is. The bureaucrats withdrew to debate among themselves, while Hazel's squadron gathered around her. 7 ghosts who'd just proven that the legend could be reborn. Holly was grinning, the adrenaline still singing in her veins. Luna and Jack were comparing notes on the Moscow approach. The others were already talking about what they could do better next time. Next time, because there would definitely be a next time. 7, Connor approached with a tablet. You need to see this. On the screen was a news report from Moscow. Smuggling ring disrupted in bold raid, the headline read. The Russians were spinning the entire event as their own operation, claiming credit for disrupting a criminal network. There was no mention of American involvement, no hint of Ghost Squadron's presence. Perfect, Mitchell said, reading over their shoulders. They save face, we get our asset, and nobody starts World War III. This is exactly why we need ghosts. Over the next hours, as debriefs were conducted and reports filed, in systems that officially didn't exist, Hazel found herself back in Hangar 7, standing before the same Black Hawk that had started everything that morning 3 days ago. Or was it a lifetime ago? Emma Santos was there, surprisingly, with her mother Maria. They had driven from San Diego when they heard Ghost 7 was flying again. Maria was exactly as Hazel remembered. Kind eyes, warm smile, alive because of choices made in gunfire and chaos. I wanted to thank you, Maria said simply, not just for Panama, but for continuing, for not letting that break you. It did break me, Hazel admitted. For 3 years it broke me, but sometimes broken things can be rebuilt stronger. Like ghost squadrons? Emma asked with teenage insight. Exactly like ghost squadrons. Later, as the base settled into night routine, Hazel gathered her pilots in the briefing room one final time. 7 ghosts who'd just made the impossible possible. We did good today, she began, but this is just the beginning. There will be more missions, more impossible choices, more times when we have to decide between protocol and people. I need to know you're ready for that. 7, Holly spoke for all of them. We volunteered for this. We knew what it meant to become ghosts. We're ready. Hazel nodded, then pulled out a set of coins from her pocket. New challenge coins, freshly minted, showing the Ghost Squadron emblem with a phoenix rising from flames. The symbolism wasn't subtle, but it didn't need to be. These coins mean you're part of something that doesn't officially exist, she said, handing one to each pilot. You're ghosts now. You serve in shadows, save in silence, and sacrifice without recognition. Can you live with that? The response was unanimous. They could. As the meeting broke up, Director Mitchell appeared one last time. The phone will ring again, Commander. Soon. The world has no shortage of impossible missions. We'll be ready, Hazel promised. But for now, for tonight, Ghost Squadron could rest. 7 pilots who'd proven that legends could be reborn, that redemption was possible, and that sometimes the best heroes were the ones nobody knew about. Hazel returned to her quarters, to the room that had waited 3 years for her return. On the desk, beside the coffee mug with its ancient ring stain, someone had left a new photograph. It showed the new Ghost Squadron standing beside their aircraft, 7 pilots ready to fly into whatever darkness needed them. She placed it on the wall next to the photo from Panama, the past and present of Ghost Squadron side by side, the 6 who had fallen and the 7 who now flew, the price of service and the promise of redemption. Her reflection caught in the glass covering the photos, not the broken woman who'd hidden for 3 years, not the janitor who'd pushed mops in penance, but Lieutenant Commander Hazel, Ghost 7 Carter, scarred but strong, haunted but hopeful, ready to lead ghosts into whatever impossible missions awaited. The secure phone sat silent on the nightstand, but she knew it would ring. Tomorrow, next week, next month. It would ring with another crisis, another impossibility, another chance to prove that Ghost Squadron's resurrection was more than just one woman's redemption. It was a promise to all those who served in shadows, who sacrificed in silence, who saved lives that would never know they were in danger. It was proof that heroes could fall and rise again, that guilt could be transformed into purpose, that the dead could inspire the living to fly higher than ever before. Outside her window, the flight line stretched toward mountains painted silver by moonlight. Somewhere out there, threats were emerging that would require ghosts to stop them. Somewhere, innocents were in danger who would need shadows to save them. And when that call came, when that phone rang, Ghost Squadron would answer. 7 pilots who didn't exist, flying aircraft that were never there, completing missions that never happened. The perfect warriors for an imperfect world. Hazel touched the tattoo on her arm one last time before sleep, the 6 names that would always be with her, the 6 ghosts who flew with her in spirit every time she took to the air. They were at peace now, she realized, not because she'd found redemption, but because she'd found purpose, not because she'd forgotten them, but because she'd honored them in the only way that mattered, by continuing to serve. Ghost 7 was home, Ghost Squadron was reborn, and somewhere in the shadows between midnight and dawn, between memory and mission, between sacrifice and salvation, the ghosts would fly again. They always did. They always would. Because that's what ghosts do. They rise.